They called me the immigrant bride, said I was after the family fortune. So when his mother ruined my gown and slapped me at the altar, I didn't fight back. Not with tears. I fought with proof. Her voice on my phone, her signature on every receipt, her downfall live-streamed to millions. By the time the cops showed up, she wasn't just losing her son. She was losing everything. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't forget to hit subscribe, smash like button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. It happened on the happiest day of my life. Or at least that's what it was supposed to be. The morning light streamed through the stained glass windows of the Carmel Chapel, soft and golden, dancing across the white marble floor. Guests whispered in excitement phones, already half raised, ready to capture the perfect moment when I'd walk down the aisle. I could still hear the music, the strings tuning the quiet shuffle of designer heels on polished stone. And then everything stopped. Victoria Blackwell. My groom's mother, a woman who believed the world should orbit around her last name, stood in the center aisle wearing a white dress far more elaborate than any mother of the groom should wear. Diamonds glittered at her throat and on her wrists. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She turned toward me, toward the wedding coordinator in the navy uniform she thought was beneath her, and hissed, "You people never do anything right." Then she raised her hand and slapped me across the face. The sound cracked through the air like a gunshot. My head snapped sideways. The sting bloomed hot against my cheek. I froze, not from fear, but from disbelief. Around me, the murmurs started rippling like water breaking against stone. Did she just slap someone? Oh my God, that's the coordinator. I bent down instinctively to pick up the pearl earring that had fallen from my ear. My fingers trembled, but I refused to cry. I'd spent years learning how not to cry when someone wanted me to. At the altar, Ethan turned sharply. He looked almost boyish in his tuxedo clean-shaven, his blue eyes searching through the confusion. For a second, he didn't understand what he was seeing. Then realization dawned, the kind that drains the color from your face and replaces it with horror. "Mother." His voice cracked, echoing through the chapel. "What did you just do?" Victoria ignored him, straightening her diamond bracelet, her tone dripping with contempt. "I told her to have the bride ready. This is what happens when you hire the help instead of professionals." The organist faltered mid-note. Guests fidgeted, unsure whether to stand leave or pretend nothing had happened. Even the priest at the altar froze, one hand still clutching his Bible. "Mrs. Blackwell." I said quietly, the words catching in my throat. "Please lower your voice." She turned on me again, eyes narrowing. "Excuse me, you don't tell me what to do in my son's wedding." Every word that fell from her mouth was caught by the tiny microphone clipped to Ethan's lapel for the videographer. It carried her venom through the chapel speakers, echoing against the high ceiling for everyone to hear. "You people never do anything right. Trash." The words hit harder than the slap. The air seemed to leave the room. Ethan started toward us, but Victoria raised a hand like a queen dismissing a servant. "Stay where you are, Ethan. You've done enough by letting this circus happen. Enough," he said, voice low and shaking. "You just assaulted someone." "Assaulted," she scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous," I corrected an incompetent girl. "It's called standards." Gasps filled the room. Someone muttered, "She's lost her mind." Another whispered, "Who does that in public?" I stood there, my cheek still throbbing, my pulse hammering in my ears. I wanted to scream, to tear off the uniform and tell her exactly who I was. But I didn't. Not yet. I wanted her to finish her show, to expose herself in front of every single person who thought the Blackwells were untouchable. The sound of sirens floated faintly through the stained glass, distant but drawing closer. The whispers around me turned into a low hum. I caught a glimpse of Margaret Ethan's grandmother clutching her cane, her eyes wide with something between shame and pity. Victoria adjusted her hair, pretending nothing was wrong, pretending she hadn't just fractured the illusion of grace she built her life on. "Let's get this over with," she said coldly. Ethan's jaw tightened. "You have no idea what you've just done." He didn't move toward me yet. Maybe he was still processing. Maybe he was terrified that if he did, it would all become too real. I straightened slowly, meeting Victoria's eyes, my fingers brushing the burn on my face. "You made a mistake," I said softly. "You just don't know it yet." Her brow furrowed. "What did you say?" But I didn't repeat myself. I looked past her to the chapel doors, where the faint red-blue lights began flashing against the glass. And as I stood there surrounded by whispers, my own voice filled the silence inside my head. That was the moment everything I had endured, every insult, every humiliation, every whisper that I didn't belong, came to light. But to understand why the cops ended up at my wedding, why a woman like Victoria Blackwell lost everything in a single afternoon, we need to go back 6 years. The smell of fried eggs and coffee was the soundtrack of my childhood. In 2016, every morning at 6 a.m., sunlight spilled through the front windows of my parents' little diner, Reyes Family Kitchen, on the south side of San Diego. The bell above the door chimed constantly, and my mother, Maria, moved between tables with her apron tied high, humming an old tune while serving breakfast plates bigger than most people's appetites. My father, Carlos, stayed behind the counter tinkering with the same ancient espresso machine he swore he would fix tomorrow. He'd been saying that since 2003. We weren't rich, but the smell of cinnamon and coffee made the place feel like home. My parents came to this country with nothing but recipes and hope, and somehow they'd turned both into a business that paid the bills and bought me a college degree. Every time I walked in, my mom said the same thing, "Mija, you work too hard." I'd smile, steal a piece of toast off the counter, and tell her that's exactly what they taught me to do. By then, I was 22, and working as the assistant manager at a small seaside boutique hotel called the Seabright. It wasn't fancy, but it had charm. White shutters, ocean breeze, and regular guests who called me the girl who fixes everything. I liked being that girl. Calm, organized, reliable. I thought life was finally steady, until one night when the sky split open with thunder. The rain came sideways off the Pacific, hammering against the hotel windows. The lights flickered, then died. The generator kicked in, sputtered, and failed. Within seconds, I heard the dull thump of panic. The elevator alarm. Of course, I muttered, grabbing a flashlight from the front desk. The elevator was stuck between floors. I could hear a man's voice echoing inside. "Hello. Hello, anyone out there?" I shined the light through the narrow gap. "Hi, this is management. Don't panic. Are you okay?" Yeah," he said, his tone polite but nervous. "Just trapped in a metal box in the dark. Doing great." That made me laugh. "All right, I'm calling maintenance. We'll get you out soon." "Take your time," he replied, voice calm now. "I'm just getting to know the elevator's personality." It took 30 minutes before the maintenance guy showed up, but by then, the man inside and I were already talking through the door. His voice had that East Coast smoothness, soft vowels, confident pauses. "So are blackouts normal around here?" he asked. "Only when the ocean decides it's mad at us," I said. "You visiting or local business trip? Boston to San Diego for a conference?" "Boston," I repeated. "So you're not used to power outages or tacos that don't come in hard shells?" He laughed, a low, easy laugh. Fair point. When the doors finally opened, he stepped out rain-soaked and smiling, carrying a briefcase like it was made of gold. His suit was dark, perfectly cut, though the wet fabric clung to him awkwardly. He ran a hand through his hair, sheepish. "I guess this isn't my best look." "Could be worse," I said, holding up the flashlight. "You could still be in there." We ended up in the lobby sitting across from each other with 2 cups of lukewarm coffee. The generator hummed weakly. Candles flickered on the tables. It felt strangely intimate, like we were the last 2 people awake in the world. He told me his name was Ethan. No last name, just Ethan. He talked about work, how he traveled too much, how hotels all start to feel the same after a while. "Must be nice," I said. "Seeing the world." He shrugged. "Sometimes it feels like I'm just collecting hotel keycards instead of memories." That line stuck with me. It sounded like something a lonely person says, but doesn't want anyone to notice. I asked him what he missed most when he was away. He said, sitting still. "Eating food that isn't plated by a chef who hates carbs." I smiled. "We have plenty of carbs in my world." We sat in the glow of emergency lights while rain battered the glass. The air smelled like coffee and ozone. Somewhere the maintenance man cursed under his breath. I noticed his watch. A simple, black-faced one, understated, but expensive enough to make me blink. "You're not from around here, are you?" I asked, teasing. He looked at his wrist and smiled. "Boston? Family business?" There was a kind of weight behind the words, like he was used to people knowing what that meant. I didn't, not yet. I leaned back. Family business. So you're one of those people who actually likes working with relatives? He laughed again. Depends on the day. You. My parents own a diner, I said. Family business too. But the only arguments we have are about salt. Then you're luckier than most. We sat there until the storm eased. By the time the lights flickered back on, the clock read 2:17 a.m. The hum of electricity returned like a sigh of relief. Well, I said, standing up, guess that's your cue to get some sleep. He looked up at me, eyes tired but kind. Thanks for the rescue, Miss Reyes, I said. Isabella Reyes. He reached for my hand. Ethan. Ethan what? I asked, smiling. He hesitated just a beat. Blackwell. For a second, the name didn't land. Then it did. I'd heard it before. In the news and business journals, whispered like a legend. Blackwell and Partners, one of Boston's oldest law firms. Old money. The kind of family whose name could open doors or close them on people like me. I froze for just a breath, still holding his hand. Blackwell, I repeated. That's a big name. He gave a small, almost apologetic smile. Depends on who you ask. I didn't say it then, but something in my stomach twisted. I thought of my mother's hands covered in flour. My father bent over the espresso machine, the smell of our diner that clung to every piece of clothing I owned. I wondered what someone like him saw when he looked at someone like me. Outside, the rain finally stopped. The ocean roared in the distance, soft and endless. He stood gathering his things. Thank you, Isabella. Really. Just doing my job, I said. He paused, then added quietly, You're good at it. After he left, I sat alone in the lobby, the flashlight still on the table, its beam fading. I stared at the empty elevator and thought about how strange fate could be, how one broken circuit could connect two people who came from entirely different worlds. I didn't know then that family business meant more than lawyers and real estate. It meant legacy power and judgment, and it would take me 6 years to learn what it really costs to marry into a name like Blackwell. 2 years later, I boarded a flight to Boston with my heart pounding somewhere between excitement and nausea. Ethan had invited me home for Thanksgiving. They'll love you, he'd said that morning, kissing my forehead, as if reassurance could be packed in a kiss. I smiled back, pretending to believe him. I'd met difficult people before. Hotel guests who barked orders, customers who snapped fingers, but nothing about the name Blackwell sounded like customer service. Boston greeted me with sharp cold that cut straight through my coat. The car that picked us up from the airport smelled faintly of leather and wealth. We drove past rows of brownstones until the city gave way to an old neighborhood of estates that looked like they'd been built to survive centuries. When we pulled through the tall iron gates marked Blackwell House, I felt something heavy settle in my stomach. The house wasn't just big, it was the kind of old, quiet big that didn't need to prove itself. It whispered, We've been here longer than you've been alive. Victoria opened the door herself. Her smile was thin, the kind you offer to a reporter, not a guest. You must be Isabella. From California, was it? Her tone made California sound like a diagnosis. Yes, ma'am, I said, holding out my hand. Thank you for having me. She looked at it for half a beat before shaking it lightly, her diamond bracelet catching the afternoon light. Of course. We always make room for Ethan's friends. Behind her, the hallway stretched long and silent. Oil portraits lined the walls, stern men in waistcoats, women with pearls, and the same sharp chin as hers. Every inch of the house smelled faintly of furniture polish and control. Charles Blackwell appeared from the next room. Gray hair perfectly parted, reading glasses hanging around his neck. Ethan, he said, nodding to his son, then to me. And Miss Reyes. Was it? His handshake was firm but brief, a formality performed on autopilot. Yes, sir, I said. Welcome to our home. The words were polite, but they carried the warmth of an empty fireplace. Dinner was served in a dining room large enough to echo. The table ran almost the length of the room, covered in china that probably had its own insurance policy. I sat beside Ethan across from Victoria. A small army of servers moved silently, swapping out plates I barely had time to touch. So, Isabella Victoria began slicing her turkey with surgical precision. Ethan tells us you manage, what was it? A motel. A boutique hotel, I said gently. Right by the beach. How charming. Her fork paused midair. A family business, I assume. Not really, I said, forcing a small laugh. My parents run a diner in San Diego. How quaint, she replied. A family business, too. Just a little smaller, I imagine. The table went quiet, except for the faint clink of silverware. Ethan reached under the table and squeezed my hand. I smiled at my plate. I smiled through the silence. Because that's what you do when people like her expect you to break. Charles cleared his throat. Ethan, your firm's partnership proposal. How's that moving along? Ethan shifted in his chair. Dad, we can talk work later. Victoria's eyes flicked between us, curious, assessing. I think it's admirable that you work so hard, Ethan. But I do worry that certain distractions could pull you off course. I'm not distracted, he said quietly. Of course not. She set her lips, curving into something that pretended to be maternal. Dessert came and went, pumpkin pie that tasted like dust and tension. Then Victoria leaned back, dabbing at her mouth with a linen napkin. Tell me, Isabella, she said sweetly, where does your family come from originally? My parents are from Mexico, I said, straightening a little. They immigrated here in the 80s. Ah, she said, nodding. And now you're here. The American dream. Her voice dripped with polite disbelief. I caught Margaret Ethan's grandmother watching quietly from the far end of the table. She didn't speak, but her eyes were kind, almost apologetic. Victoria set down her fork. The Blackwells, of course, trace our roots back to the Mayflower. She smiled proudly, waiting for admiration. I smiled back, keeping my voice even. Mine came through the border. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Victoria's lips twitched into a smirk. Ah, the scenic route. Ethan dropped his napkin onto the table. Mom. No, it's fine, I interrupted softly, meeting her gaze. Different routes, same country, right? Charles lifted his wineglass. Oblivious, or pretending to be. To family, he announced, and protecting the legacy that's been built for generations. The toast hung heavy in the air. I raised my glass out of politeness, but the wine tasted bitter. I wasn't sure if it was the drink or the silence. After dinner, Ethan helped me into my coat. Outside, the November air hit my lungs like ice. We stood on the front steps, the grand door closing behind us with a final muffled thud. The wind howled through the trees. I'm sorry, Ethan said quietly. They're not always like that. I stared at the long driveway, the gate barely visible through the cold. You can't apologize for who raised you, I said softly. But you can choose who you become. He reached for my hand, his breath visible in the night air. I choose you. For a moment, I believed him. We stood there in the Boston cold, his hand warm in mine, and I thought maybe love could thaw anything. But as I looked back at the dark house behind us, the portraits, the polished silver, the legacy, I felt a flicker of doubt. Some things I realized never melt. The sun was setting over the San Diego coastline, the sky painted in gold and fire. I remember the wind that evening. It smelled like salt and promise. Ethan and I were walking barefoot along the sand, the waves brushing our ankles, when he stopped suddenly. His suit pants were rolled to his knees, and he looked both terrified and certain. He dropped down on one knee, holding out a simple gold ring. Not the Blackwell heirloom his mother had demanded he use, but something humble, beautiful ours. Isabella Reyes, he said, his voice shaking just enough to make me laugh through the tears already burning my eyes. You've seen every piece of me worth loving, and every piece I try to hide. Will you marry me anyway? I couldn't breathe for a second. Then I said yes. It wasn't a quiet yes. It was the kind that cracked open your chest. The kind of yes that felt brave. We celebrated with champagne in plastic cups and salt water on our skin. That night we took photos on his phone. Our hands intertwined, the ring glinting in the last light. When he posted them, I didn't think much of it. 2 days later, I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop. Comments flooded in under the photo: gold digger, green card bride, she's after his money, she'll divorce him in a year. At first I laughed. Internet strangers are cruel by default. But then the messages started arriving privately, calling me things I hadn't heard since high school. It felt personal. Too personal. Ethan saw my face pale as I scrolled. Hey, he said, grabbing the phone. Don't read that garbage. Someone had to start it, I said quietly. Not my parents, he said quickly. Too quickly. Later that day, he called Victoria. I only heard his side. Mom, this is insane. No, don't play dumb. It's coming from your circle. Well, maybe not you directly, but you know who. Stop. Don't say her name like that. He hung up, jaw tight. She denies everything. I wanted to believe him. For a few weeks, things went quiet. We focused on planning tasting cakes, finding a venue. I let myself think maybe, just maybe the noise had died down. Then my boss called me into his office. He shut the door, folded his hands and said, Isabella, an anonymous complaint came through the company email. It accuses you of inappropriate behavior with male guests. My heart dropped. What? It's probably nothing he said carefully, but HR has to take it seriously. We'll need to suspend you until it's resolved. I wanted to scream, but the words stuck in my throat. Years of professionalism had trained me too well. I understand, I said, even though I didn't. That night, I sat in my car in the hotel parking lot, long after everyone had gone home. My reflection in the windshield looked like someone else's, someone who had done everything right and was still being punished for it. When I finally drove home, Lena was waiting outside my apartment, leaning against her car, a takeout bag in one hand and her laptop in the other. Okay, she said. Tell me everything. Lena Alvarez had been my friend since college, a lawyer who specialized in employment cases. She listened, chewing a fry like it was the anonymous sender's head. Give me a day, she said. I'll find the source. True to her word, she did. The next evening, she showed up with her laptop open, scrolling through lines of code and digital breadcrumbs like it was a game she'd already won. The complaint came from a masked IP, but the routing bounced through an office server registered to the Blackwell Foundation. Guess who owns that? I stared at the screen. Victoria? Bingo! I leaned back, pressing my hands over my face. Of course it was her. Lena frowned. You're not even surprised. I wish I were. She leaned closer. You could sue. I could. I said, but that's what she wants. For me to look like I'm fighting her. I'm not giving her that satisfaction. Lena smirked. So what's your plan? Silence, I said. When you grow up working for everything you have, you learn that silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. The next morning, I went back to my parents' diner to help with breakfast rush. My mom noticed the dark circles under my eyes. Mija, you're tired. What's wrong? I forced a smile. Forced a work drama. It'll blow over. She didn't believe me, but she let it go. She always did. By the time Ethan got home that night, I was sitting on the couch scrolling through wedding ideas on my phone. He dropped his keys on the counter and sat next to me, exhaling hard. Mom called again, he said. I looked up. What now? She said, if I marry you, I'll lose everything. The room went still. I stared at him, waiting for him to take it back, but he didn't. She didn't mean, he started. Don't, I said quietly. You don't have to explain her. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. I deleted the message. I didn't want you to see it. My voice cracked sharper than I meant it to be. You think hiding it protects me or protects her? He didn't answer. I stood up, pacing. The window reflected our shapes. Him, sitting, shoulders slumped me, standing, arms crossed like a stranger in my own life. I whispered. She's already taking pieces of me. And you're letting her... Ethan looked up, eyes glassy. I love you. I'm not letting her win. I turned to face him fully. Then prove it. We sat there in silence as the waves outside crashed against the cliffs below. The air smelled like salt again, but this time it wasn't promise. It was warning. He reached for my hand and I let him, even though part of me had already started to pull away. That night I couldn't sleep. My phone buzzed again, another message from an unknown number. You'll never be one of them. I didn't delete it. I just stared at the screen until it dimmed, thinking about how love could be so fierce and yet so fragile when it had to stand against a name. February 2024. 3 months before the wedding, and everything should have felt like a dream. Guest lists, fittings, final touches, but instead it felt like the walls were closing in. The first sign came with a phone call from my seamstress. Sweetheart, are you sure you ordered this? I frowned. What do you mean, the gown that arrived this morning? It's not what we discussed. The fabric is wrong the size, the brand. It looks cheap. I drove to the studio, heart pounding. There it was, hanging limply under fluorescent light. a shiny polyester knockoff of the custom silk gown I'd spent 6 months saving for. The label on the shipping box even spelled my name wrong. Isabella Rios, not Reyes. My chest tightened. This isn't a mistake, I whispered. The seamstress hesitated. The shipping form says the change was requested by the bride herself. Ethan tried to calm me when I showed him the photos. It's probably just a mix-up, he said, half distracted, scrolling through his phone. I turned toward him sharply. A mix-up that spells my name wrong. A mix-up that somehow cancels the first order. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. Bella. We've had so much going on. People make mistakes. People. Not names. Not families. 2 days later, the florist called. Hi, Miss Reyes. I just wanted to confirm the new flower order for the ceremony. What new order? Well, the previous one was canceled, and this new one's unusual. Sympathy lilies and white chrysanthemums. You sure about that? I froze. Sympathy lilies. Funeral flowers. No, I said quietly. I didn't change anything. The woman on the other end sounded nervous. I'll revert to the original order, ma'am. But the call we got came from a woman identifying herself as your wedding planner, Mrs. V. Blackwell. My throat went dry. When I told Ethan, he just stared silent for a long moment, then said, She wouldn't do that, wouldn't she? Bella. He took a step closer, reaching for my hand. I pulled back. You think this is her idea of fun? She's been calling my job my vendors. She even emailed my boss, pretending to be me, and you think this is a coincidence? His shoulders slumped, because admitting it means they might succeed. I stared at him, the air between us heavy. Sometimes love sounds like denial. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and started a new folder labeled Evidence. I took photos of the box, the wrong flowers, the invoices. I recorded voice memos, every detail I could remember, every incident that didn't sit right. Lena's voice echoed in my head from weeks before. People like her always slip up. You just have to be ready when they do. Every morning after that, something new went wrong. The caterer lost our deposit. The band canceled, claiming I'd told them we'd changed dates. When I called to clear it up, the lead singer said, You sure? I talked to your mother-in-law myself. Lovely woman. I hung up, shaking. Lovely woman. That was her game. Smile, sabotage, repeat. Ethan started coming home later, always with that same weary look. Work, he'd say, dropping his briefcase by the door. Work or family, I'd ask. He never answered. One night, I found him on the couch, staring at his phone, jaw tight. Who are you texting? I asked. He locked the screen instantly. No one. Don't lie to me. It's Sophia, he said finally. She says Mom's just stressed about the wedding. Stressed, I snapped. She's dismantling it one piece at a time. He looked away. You think I don't know, but what am I supposed to do? Cut her out of my life completely? Yes, I said, surprising both of us with how quickly the word left my mouth. If that's what it takes. He stood up, voice trembling with anger and exhaustion. You don't understand what it's like being a Blackwell. There are expectations. Exactly. I interrupted. That's the problem. You're marrying me, Ethan, not the expectations. He didn't answer. He just left the room. Hours later, I went to bed alone, my heart numb. The silence in our apartment was louder than any argument we'd ever had. The next afternoon, I went for a walk on the pier to clear my head. My phone buzzed. It was Ethan's, left on the counter at home, connected to our shared iCloud account. A message appeared on the screen. Ask her why she really wants your last name. The sender ID was an unknown number, but I didn't need to guess. Sophia. I stared at the words, my hands trembling. It wasn't just sabotage anymore. It was a campaign, a family effort. That night when Ethan came home, I said nothing. I made dinner, listened to him talk about meetings, nodded in the right places. I pretended everything was fine. But inside I was done pretending. I'd spent years playing polite, giving people like Victoria the benefit of the doubt, hoping that love could make the wealthy kind and the cruel repent. I knew better now. I closed the laptop after he fell asleep and opened my evidence folder again. I renamed it Plan. No more waiting for karma. No more hoping someone else would see the truth. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I was going to prepare. The Carmel Grand looked like something out of a magazine that night. Gold chandeliers, polished marble, a string quartet, playing slow, expensive music that didn't match the cold air in the room. I stood in the entryway of the ballroom, smoothing the fabric of my dress, pretending to breathe normally. The rehearsal dinner was supposed to be the last peaceful night before the wedding. Instead, it felt like walking into enemy territory, dressed in hope. My parents arrived just behind me. My mother, Maria, wore her best blue dress, the one she'd sewn herself 15 years ago for church. My father, Carlos, adjusted his old suit jacket, straightened his tie twice before stepping forward. In her hands, my mother carried a tray covered in a white towel. I could smell it even before she lifted the cloth. Fresh pan dulce sweet bread she'd baked that morning. A gift, a gesture of love from one family to another. Victoria noticed us almost immediately. She was standing near the head of the table, surrounded by guests in black ties and sequins laughing at something Charles had just said. When she saw my parents, her laughter faltered into a smile that wasn't real. "Oh," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "How thoughtful. We have catering, but it's sweet of you." Charles chuckled, leaning toward one of his partners. "They brought dessert," he whispered, and they both laughed like it was the punchline to a joke. Sophia, standing near the bar with a glass of champagne, lifted her phone and filmed the entire exchange. I could see the red recording light blinking. I stepped forward and took the tray from my mother before Victoria could say anything else. "It's a family recipe," I said evenly. "It's tradition in our family to bring something homemade." Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "So charming," she said. "Truly." She turned to a waiter. "Please take that to the kitchen. Perhaps the staff will enjoy it." My mother's hands, now empty, folded together tightly. She whispered, "It's okay, mija," but her eyes, those warm, patient eyes, held quiet shame. My father didn't say a word. He looked at the floor jaw set. I smiled, because that's what I'd learned to do when I was hurt in public. Ethan stayed still, one hand gripping his wine glass, the other jammed in his pocket. His silence filled the room louder than any insult. Dinner was a blur. Victoria made conversation with her guests about old money traditions and family legacies. Every few minutes, her gaze slid to me like a knife she was waiting to use. When the toasts began, Charles stood up, holding his glass high. "To family," he said, his voice echoing across the room. "And to keeping our standards alive." Guests clapped politely. My parents smiled uncertainly, not realizing the toast wasn't meant for them. After dinner, I slipped out to the terrace for air. The ocean stretched black and endless beyond the lights of the hotel garden. I found Ethan there, leaning against the railing, cigarette in hand. He hadn't smoked since college. "I didn't know you started again," I said quietly. He didn't look at me. "Just one." "That's what everyone says," I said, watching the smoke curl between us. "Your silence hurts worse than their words." He exhaled, staring at the horizon. "You think I don't know what they're doing? Then why don't you stop them, because if I do," he said, voice low, "they'll see they got to me, and if they see that, they'll think they won." I shook my head. "That's not strength, Ethan. That's surrender dressed up as composure." He turned toward me, finally, eyes tired. "What do you want me to say?" "Bella, that I hate them, that I wish I was adopted. They're still my family." "And what am I?" I asked, an experiment in how far you can push their tolerance. He didn't answer. He just flicked the cigarette into the dark and walked past me back into the ballroom. The smell of smoke lingered long after he was gone. Later, back in my hotel room, I peeled off the dress and stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. My eyes were red, my lipstick smudged, my curls limp from humidity. Somewhere downstairs, the music was still playing, muffled through the walls. I grabbed my phone and called Lena. She picked up on the second ring. "Tell me you didn't hit anyone," she said. "Not yet." I said, my voice small. "What happened?" I told her everything. The dinner, my parents, the laughter, the silence. There was a pause on the other end. Then she said, "You know what I'm going to say." "Maybe I should just call it off," I said, cutting her off first. "Maybe I should walk away before they destroy me completely." "No," she said sharply. "You don't run from people like that. You let them show who they are, and you keep the receipts. People like that bury themselves." I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the white gown hanging in the closet. "You think I can really beat them?" "This isn't about winning, Bella," she said softly. "It's about surviving with your dignity intact. That's how you win." I swallowed hard. "Then I'll make sure they never forget what they did." "Good girl," she said. "Now go to sleep. Big day tomorrow." After we hung up, I stared at my phone for a long moment. Then I opened my settings, scrolled down, and activated the hidden recording app Lena had once shown me. The icon turned red. I slipped the phone into my clutch and set it on the nightstand. If tomorrow they wanted a show, I'd make sure the truth had front row seats. I turned off the light. In the dark, the only thing visible was the outline of the wedding dress hanging in the closet, pure white, glowing faintly from the sliver of moonlight seeping through the window. The calm before the storm. The kind of calm that never lasts. The fog over Carmel that morning looked like someone had draped a thin white veil across the world. I woke up to the sound of champagne corks popping and someone shouting my name down the hallway. The suite smelled of perfume, hairspray, and nerves. For one fleeting second, I thought everything might actually go right. Then my maid of honor burst through the door. "Bella." "Oh my God, don't freak out," she said, voice shaking. My stomach dropped. "What happened?" She hesitated, twisting her fingers. "The dress. It's ruined." The word hit me like a slap. I ran down the hall, my bare feet sliding on the marble floor, heart hammering. When I reached the bridal suite, I stopped cold. My gown, my dream dress, lay crumpled in a corner, soaked in what looked like red wine. The zipper was ripped, the lace shredded as if someone had clawed at it. The deep burgundy stains spread across the bodice like blood. For a moment, I couldn't move. "Who did this?" I whispered. One of the attendants stepped forward, pale and stammering. "We found it like this when we came in. Maybe someone spilled something on the gown hanging 6 feet off the ground." I snapped. Ethan appeared in the doorway, still in his undershirt tie slung around his neck. "What's going on?" I turned toward him, shaking. "My dress. It's destroyed." He walked over, examined the damage, then sighed. "Accidents happen, Bella. Accidents." I said the word sharp. This many accidents stop being coincidences. He rubbed the back of his neck, trying to stay calm. "Let's not start that again. Not today." I stared at him, searching his face for any trace of belief in me. There wasn't any. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed on the vanity. A message from Lena. It was a photo of a florist invoice. My florist, bearing the signature of Victoria's assistant. The note at the bottom read, "Revised per Mrs. Blackwell's request. Proof. Finally, proof." I felt something in me shift, a quiet clarity rising where panic had lived. Just then, a knock on the door. The wedding coordinator, Julie, stood there, face pale, phone pressed to her chest. "I'm so sorry," she said. "My son's been taken to urgent care. I have to leave right now. I can't believe this is happening." My mind started racing. "Julie, go! He needs you. I can't just abandon the wedding." "I'll handle it," I said quickly. "I've worked events. I know the schedule. I can make it work." Her eyes widened. "Are you sure?" "Yes." She hesitated for only a second, then nodded, handed me her headset and clipboard, and left, rushing down the hall. I closed the door behind her, turned toward the mirror, and stared at my reflection. My hair was half done, my makeup unfinished. I looked like a ghost of the woman I was supposed to be today. Slowly, I tucked my hair into a bun, secured it with pins, wiped away the smudged mascara. I pulled on Julie's blazer. It was a little loose at the shoulders, and clipped the headset into place. If they wanted control, I'd give them order. Their order. The fog outside had lifted slightly when I stepped into the church. The scent of flowers. Wrong flowers. Hit me first. Sympathy lilies. The kind that sat in funeral homes. Victoria stood at the front, overseeing every detail with military precision. Her voice carried across the pews. "No, the runner needs to be perfectly straight. And someone move those chairs. My guests can't sit behind a column." Her friends hovered near her, all pastel suits and practiced smiles. Victoria. One of them said, "This is the most elegant wedding I've ever seen." "Oh, it has to be," she replied. "Nothing less for my son. He's marrying beneath him already. The least I can do is elevate the scenery." I froze behind the floral arch fingers tightening around the clipboard. A younger woman leaned in, whispering, "You really think she's after the money?" Victoria's laugh was low and cruel. "Please, I've seen this movie before. Today I'll prove she's a thief. Wait till you see his face." My pulse thundered in my ears. "She's a thief," the friend whispered, eyes wide. Victoria nodded smug. "You'll see. Cassandra found something in her bag last night. I told her to keep it until the perfect moment." Cassandra. Sophia. The same sister who'd texted Ethan from that unknown number. I gripped the clipboard tighter. I wanted to step out to scream to tear her words apart in front of everyone, but instead I forced myself to breathe. One slow inhale, one controlled exhale. She kept talking. I gave Ethan everything. Education opportunity this wedding. He thinks he's in love, but she's playing a game. And today I'll end it. Her voice sliced through the air like a blade, every syllable polished with confidence. Behind her, Charles appeared, adjusting his tie. "Victoria," he said quietly, "maybe don't make a scene." She turned to him with an icy smile. "It won't be a scene if I'm right." He frowned, but said nothing. I ducked behind the arch again as a pair of waiters carried in champagne flutes. I could hear my heart pounding, could feel the blood rushing in my ears. Outside, the first guests had started arriving. The organist tested the notes. The church smelled of candle wax and lilies, the kind of scent that clung to your skin long after you left. I looked down at the headset blinking on my collar, the clipboard in my shaking hands. I whispered to myself, "You wanted a perfect show, Victoria. Let's make it perfect." And as the doors opened, I stepped back into the light, blending in with the staff, silent and invisible, watching everything unfold. The calm before the chaos I knew was coming. The chapel was glowing in soft light, the kind that makes everyone look like they belong in a magazine spread. Rows of guests whispered behind programs, violins filling the air with something delicate and expensive. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady on the clipboard. I moved through the side aisle, pretending to check candles, flowers timing, every step bringing me closer to her. Victoria stood at the front, pacing, pearls glinting under the chandeliers. "Where is that girl?" she hissed, voice slicing through the music. "Where's the bride?" Charles leaned toward her. "We should delay. Something's wrong." Victoria snapped her fan shut with a loud crack. "We don't delay for people like her." The words stung even though she didn't know who she was talking to. I stepped forward carefully, head down, professional smile fixed in place. "Mrs. Blackwell," I said softly. "The bride will be ready in just a few minutes." She turned sharply, her perfume hitting me before her words did. "You incompetent girl. You can't even get a wedding right." Before I could step back, her hand flew up and connected with my cheek. The sound was sharp, the kind of sound that cuts through music and prayer and air itself. My face snapped sideways. Someone in the pews gasped. A man dropped his program, the paper fluttering to the floor. I stood frozen. The burn spread across my skin like fire, my pulse roaring in my ears. I'd imagined so many ways this day could go wrong, but not like this. Then she said it, loud enough for the microphone to catch. Maybe in her country lateness is acceptable. Everything stopped. The violins, the whispers, even the air. At the altar, Ethan turned. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something darker. Fury. "Mother," he said, voice echoing through the speakers. "What did you just say, Ethan?" "Not now," she hissed, trying to regain her composure. "This girl doesn't know how to—" But he was already walking down the aisle, each step heavy with restrained anger. The guests turned, watching him approach, the air thick with tension. He stopped in front of me, eyes flicking between my reddened cheek and his mother's raised chin. "Did you hit her?" "She was being insolent," Victoria said, adjusting her pearl bracelet. I was correcting her. Correcting, he repeated the word, tasting like poison. I felt something inside me click into place, fear giving way to clarity. My fingers unclipped the headset from my collar. Slowly, deliberately, I reached up and pulled out the pins holding my bun. My hair fell loose around my shoulders. Gasps rippled through the chapel. Victoria's face went pale. "What are you doing?" she demanded. Ethan turned to the crowd, his voice breaking through the silence. "Everyone," he said, his voice trembling, but clear. "Meet your wedding coordinator?" He reached for my hand, his fingers steady around mine. "And my bride." The murmur that followed sounded like thunder rolling through marble halls. Victoria stumbled a step back, her eyes wide. No, this is some kind of joke." Margaret, sitting near the front, whispered audibly. "Oh, dear God." Charles looked between us, stunned, his mouth slightly open, but no words coming out. Ethan turned fully to his mother. "You just assaulted my wife." "She's not your wife yet," Victoria snapped. "And she's certainly not—" She stopped herself, realizing half the church was still watching, recording. The priest cleared his throat awkwardly. "Perhaps we should—" "No." Ethan interrupted. "They need to hear this. All of them." Victoria's face twisted a storm of anger and disbelief. "Charles, do something." Charles finally spoke. but his voice was quiet, almost resigned. "What do you expect me to do?" "Victoria, defend you." "I expect you to protect this family," she hissed. "Gee." He looked at me, then at Ethan. "I think that's exactly what he's doing." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The room was dead silent except for the faint hum of the microphone still live on Ethan's lapel. I felt every eye on me, every whisper, every hidden phone. My cheeks still burned, but I stood taller. For the first time, I wasn't the one who looked small. Victoria's breathing quickened. She looked around wildly as if searching for an escape route for someone to take her side, but the only sound was the slow creak of pews as people leaned forward to see the drama unfold. Ethan reached out, brushing his thumb gently over the mark on my face. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. I looked straight at Victoria. "You said you wanted everything perfect," I said softly. "Congratulations. Everyone's watching." Her jaw trembled. "You little—" "Careful," Charles warned under his breath. For the first time since I'd met her, she hesitated. Her fingers twitched, her control slipping. The silence was unbearable. Then, from somewhere in the back, a guest whispered, "Is this part of the ceremony?" Margaret let out a sharp laugh that wasn't really a laugh at all. "It is now." Victoria took a shaky breath and looked at Charles again, desperate. "Fix this." But he only straightened his tie and looked away. The hum of murmurs grew louder, building like a tide. I could see phones raised, discreetly flashes ready. I felt a strange calm wash over me. The moment was surreal, detached, almost cinematic. For years she had orchestrated every scene, controlled every script, but not this one. Not anymore. Ethan took my hand again, turned to the priest, and said quietly but firmly, "Let's begin." Victoria gasped. "Ethan, don't you dare!" He didn't look back, and as the violins began, again hesitant and uncertain, the truth hung in the air like a bell that had finally been struck, loud, undeniable, and impossible to unhear. My cheek burned, but I kept my head high. The heat of humiliation had turned into something colder, sharper, resolve. The guests were whispering the priest, frozen mid-step, Ethan still standing between me and his mother, like a line she could never uncross again. I reached slowly into my clutch and pulled out my phone. My hand didn't shake. I tapped play. The sound filled the chapel through the same microphone that had broadcast Victoria's insult minutes earlier. Her own voice poured through the speakers, crisp, cruel, and unmistakable. "I'll prove she's a thief. I had the flowers changed, the dress ruined. Cassandra found the perfect way to expose her in front of everyone." Gasps broke out from the pews. One woman covered her mouth. Another man dropped his program to the floor. Victoria's head snapped around, eyes wide. "Where did you get that?" she demanded. I looked straight at her. "You gave it to me." The back doors opened, a draft sweeping through the room. Lena stepped inside her heels, clicking sharply on the marble. She wore a navy suit, calm as always, a folder tucked under her arm. "Officer over here," she called. A uniformed cop followed behind her. Officer Ryan Miller. Someone must have called him after the slap. He surveyed the scene with quiet authority, one hand resting near his belt. Lena crossed the aisle and handed him the folder. "Documents showing repeated sabotage and premeditated harassment," she said clearly. "All signed by Mrs. Victoria Blackwell." Victoria turned toward her, sputtering. "That's absurd. Those are fabricated. Funeral flower order." Lena continued evenly, wine charges for an unauthorized purchase at a hotel and a stylist payment to intentionally use the wrong product. "All billed to your charity's corporate card." Gasps again. A murmur rippled through the room, the sound of people realizing the mask had finally cracked. Charles stepped forward, his face pale. "There's been a mistake." Officer Miller raised a hand. "Sir, please step back." He looked at Victoria. "Ma'am, this qualifies as assault in a public venue. And based on what I just heard, there might be other charges worth discussing." Victoria's voice faltered. "She provoked me?" Ethan turned eyes cold. "She provoked you by existing." Victoria's mouth opened, but nothing came out. I took a breath, the sound trembling but steady. For once, I didn't need to shout. The truth was loud enough. Then Sophia's voice cracked through the silence. She was standing near the groomsman, mascara streaking down her face. "Mom told me to plant it in her purse," she cried. "The envelope with the money. I didn't want to—" Victoria whirled on her. "You ungrateful child." Officer Miller stepped forward. "That's enough." His tone snapped through the chaos, the kind of authority that ended conversations. The crowd went dead quiet again. Victoria stood rigid, clutching her designer clutch like a lifeline. You people are all conspiring against me, she hissed, eyes darting to Charles. Say something. Charles didn't move. He looked at her with an expression I'd never seen before, disappointment deep and quiet. You've said enough, Victoria, Margaret's voice carried from the front row. 40 years and you finally managed to disgrace yourself properly. Victoria's head jerked toward her mother-in-law, eyes wet but defiant. Mother, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, Margaret said, voice firm. You built your world on appearances. Now it's crumbling, and all you can do is blame the rubble. Officer Miller gestured toward the exit. Mrs. Blackwell, I need you to come with me outside while we take statements. She stared at him as if she couldn't quite process the words. You can't just escort me out of my son's wedding. It's either that, he said calmly, or I escort you out in cuffs. The silence that followed was the heaviest sound I'd ever heard. Then slowly, she took a step back, her heels clicking on the stone floor. As she walked down the aisle, the crowd shifted, parting like waves. No one said a word. Phones rose silently, the faint light of cameras glowing like judgment. Victoria's breathing quickened. Stop filming me, she snapped, voice breaking. Ethan stood tall, his jaw set. They're not filming you, Mother. They're recording the truth you tried to hide. She reached him, her hand trembling, but he didn't flinch. Ethan, she whispered, you're making a mistake. You'll regret this. He looked at her for a long moment, eyes steady. Maybe, but I won't regret protecting her. For the first time since I'd met Victoria, she looked small. Officer Miller held the door open. Let's go, ma'am. Victoria stepped through it, her head high, even as her reputation collapsed behind her. As the doors closed, the church exhaled, an audible, collective breath. The violinist's bow hung mid-air, waiting for a cue that wasn't coming. Sophia sank onto a pew, sobbing quietly. Charles remained standing still, staring at the floor, as if he could see the pieces of his family scattered there. Ethan turned to me, his voice barely a whisper. Are you okay? I nodded, though my heart was still pounding. My face still burned, but it didn't matter anymore. Outside, I could hear the muffled sound of camera shutters and distant sirens. Inside, silence filled the space where lies used to live. And in that silence, I knew everything had changed. Not just for me, but for all of them. For a moment after the doors closed, no one breathed. The sound of Victoria's heels fading down the church steps left a strange silence behind, sharp and alive. Guests shifted in their seats, the rustle of silk and the faint buzz of phones breaking through the stillness. The organist froze hands hovering over the keys, unsure whether to continue or flee. Charles cleared his throat, voice cracking slightly. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, forcing calm into every syllable. This family will handle this privately. He might as well have whispered into a hurricane. From the front pew, Margaret pushed herself up from her wheelchair, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. Privately, she repeated, You humiliated that girl publicly, Victoria. Let the public see the truth. A murmur of agreement rippled through the guests. A few clapped once, hesitant but real. Margaret turned toward me, her eyes kind but fierce. You have nothing to be ashamed of, child, she said. You stood with grace while others threw stones. I swallowed hard, fighting the lump in my throat. My grandmother's old wedding dress hung heavy on my shoulders, the seams straining where the lace had torn during the chaos. The makeshift veil. Lena's emergency backup was slightly ripped, one corner dangling awkwardly near my ear. But for the first time, I didn't care how I looked. Ethan stepped closer and reached for my hand. His fingers were warm, trembling slightly. We'll start again, he whispered. Right here, right now. Outside, through the stained glass, we could hear Victoria's muffled voice rising, arguing with Officer Miller. Even through the thick wood, her shrill tone carried. You can't tell me what to do. This is my son's wedding. Then Officer Miller's calm reply. Ma'am, please step back. The priest, who had been frozen near the altar, finally exhaled and glanced at Ethan and me. Do you still wish to proceed? He asked gently. Ethan looked at me. Only if you want to. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I nodded. Yes. Officer Miller entered again, his boots quiet on the marble. He leaned toward us, speaking low enough that only we could hear. She's not under arrest, he said, but she's leaving. Do you want to press charges? I met his steady gaze and shook my head. Not today. He nodded once, as if he understood exactly why. I turned to the guests. Hundreds of eyes watching me, some teary, some stunned. I expected judgment, maybe pity. Instead, someone started clapping. Just one person at first, then another, and another, until the sound swelled into something that filled the entire chapel. I felt my chest tighten, the sound washing over me like a tide I hadn't known I needed. Ethan squeezed my hand. "You see," he murmured, "you've already won." The priest smiled faintly. "Then let's begin, shall we?" The ceremony resumed in a strange, surreal quiet. The violins played again, softer now, almost reverent. Ethan's voice shook as he repeated his vows, but his eyes never left mine. I managed to say mine without breaking, though my voice caught when I said, "honor." I meant it differently than most brides do. Revenge isn't always punishment. Sometimes it's perspective. As we said, I do. The late sunlight broke through the stained glass windows, coloring everything in gold and crimson. It felt like the church itself was exhaling, releasing whatever curse had been hanging over the day. When the priest finally pronounced us husband and wife, a collective sigh spread through the room. People stood. They applauded again, louder, freer this time. Margaret's eyes glistened as she clapped her frail hands, trembling but strong in spirit. "Good for you," she whispered to herself, and I caught it through the hum of the crowd. Charles stood stiffly beside her, but there was something different in his face. Something uncertain, maybe regret. For once, he wasn't performing. As we walked back down the aisle arm in arm, I noticed phones rising again, not out of scandal this time, but celebration. I even smiled for them. Let the world see, I thought. Let them see what dignity looks like when it refuses to bow. Outside, the police car lights flickered red and blue against the stone steps. Victoria was standing near the edge of the parking lot, still arguing, still unwilling to accept defeat. Officer Miller gestured for her to leave. She finally did, climbing into her car with a snap of the door that echoed faintly, even after the engine roared to life. As the car pulled away, the first guests stepped out into the courtyard. The air smelled of salt and lilies. The good kind, not the funeral kind she had ordered. Lena joined us near the church doors, her expression unreadable until she broke into a grin. "You handled that beautifully," she said. "Better than I would have." "Thank you," I said, hugging her. She whispered, "By the way, someone's live streaming this. I think it's going viral." Ethan groaned softly. "Of course it is." Within hours, the video would hit every social platform tagged under the same caption, "The Slap Wedding." Clips would circulate of the moment my hair fell loose of Ethan, calling her out of me standing still as the truth echoed through the church. The internet, for once, would get it right. But right then, I didn't care about the cameras or the noise. I looked at the man beside me, the one who'd finally stood up for me, and at the small circle of people who'd seen what really mattered. Justice didn't always wear a badge or carry a gavel. Sometimes it wore a torn dress, a trembling voice, and a calm refusal to bow to cruelty. As the sun dipped low over Carmel, we stepped down the stone steps hand in hand into whatever came next. 1 week later, the world knew her name for all the wrong reasons. The headline ran across every network, every feed, Charity Queen Assaults Bride. They didn't even bother using her first name. Victoria Blackwell had become a headline, a cautionary tale dressed in pearls. Clips from the wedding were everywhere, on talk shows, news panels, even comedy sketches. The video of her slap, replayed on loop, slowed down for dramatic effect. The hosts analyzed every word she said, every sneer, every insult that echoed through the church microphones. "She really wore white to her son's wedding," one anchor joked. Another replied, "And then she hit the bride." On camera. That's a whole new level of self-sabotage. Her charity board held an emergency meeting that Monday. Within hours, they announced her temporary suspension pending internal review. Everyone knew it was permanent. The foundation she'd built on image and power was collapsing one sponsor at a time. Charles didn't fare much better. His law firm, the one with his name embossed on every mahogany door in downtown Boston, announced an ethics review after someone leaked that he'd used firm resources to fund personal family matters. He stepped down voluntarily before they could fire him. Sophia's PR agency dropped her the same day. Too much negative attention, her boss said in the leaked email. Clients don't want their brand associated with scandal. For the first time in years, the Blackwell name was toxic. Lena called me 2 days after the news broke. "You ready?" she asked. "For what?" "For the next step. With her guidance, we filed a civil suit for assault and defamation. It wasn't about revenge. It was about record, truth on paper, proof that silence had limits. The courthouse smelled of dust and bureaucracy. Cameras flashed outside journalists calling my name like I was someone famous. I wasn't. I was just a woman who got tired of being quiet. Inside, I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Lena. Across from us, Victoria looked smaller than I remembered. No makeup hair pulled back a gray suit that hung loose on her frame. Charles wasn't with her. Neither was Sophia. The judge, Karen Ellis, listened without expression as Lena laid out the facts, the recordings, the receipts, the video seen by millions. When my turn came to speak, my heart was calm. I didn't want vengeance. I said, my voice steady. I wanted respect. For myself, my family, and for every person who's ever been told they don't belong. Judge Ellis studied me for a long moment before nodding. Well, said Mrs. Blackwell, she said. And well overdue. She fined Victoria heavily enough to make a dent even in her kind of wealth, and issued a restraining order that barred her from contacting me or Ethan. When the gavel fell, the sound echoed like a door closing. It wasn't about money. It was about my name and what it meant again. A week later, news crews ran a segment titled, Grace Under Fire, the Bride Who Fought Back. My parents watched it from the diner between breakfast rushes. I saw a photo of them online later. Someone had taken it for a local feature. My father had one arm around my mother's shoulders, both of them smiling quietly at the TV screen, showing my face. My mother's hand rested over his flower still dusted across her fingers. Ella's on television, she told a regular customer proudly. She's ours. In San Diego, Ethan helped me register the paperwork for my new business, Marina Events and Design. My old job had tried to offer me a quiet settlement after suspending me without cause, but I refused. I didn't want hush money. I wanted a clean start. Within a month, I booked 3 weddings, one of them for a couple who'd seen the viral video and said, "We want someone who can handle drama with dignity." Meanwhile, somewhere across town, Victoria sat alone in her Beacon Hill townhouse, the curtains drawn. Photos of the family had been removed from the walls, replaced with bare hooks. Her phone buzzed constantly, reporters, lawyers, old friends offering sympathy that sounded like curiosity. She stopped answering. On the coffee table lay an unfinished letter in her looping, perfect handwriting. I thought I was protecting my son. I was protecting my pride. The television murmured in the background, showing the same news clip for the 3rd time that hour. My face on the screen. My voice saying I didn't want vengeance. I wanted respect. She reached for the remote and turned down the volume, then sat in silence. The house was too quiet. No servants, no calls, no noise to drown out the truth. For the first time in her life, Victoria Blackwell had no audience. She stared at the half-written letter, then picked up her pen again. The lines of her face softened as she wrote the next words slowly, deliberately. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I see it now. The damage, the fear, the way I confused control for love. She stopped breathing shakily, then folded the page in half. On the front, she wrote my name. No Mrs., no Reyes, no Blackwell, just Isabella. She slipped the letter into an envelope, sealed it, and walked to the mailbox outside her house. Her neighbors peeked through their blinds as she stepped into the cold air. Bare feet on the stone steps, her robe tugged tightly around her. She dropped the letter into the box and stood there for a long time, watching the flag lift. Then she whispered to no one. First time in my life I ever said sorry on paper. As she turned back toward the house, a gust of wind caught the hem of her robe, and for a moment she looked almost human, tired, flawed, and real. Karma hadn't just found her. It had humbled her. By 2026, the house smelled like sunshine and baby powder. Morning light spilled through the kitchen window, catching on a row of colorful toys scattered across the floor. Ethan was in pajama pants holding our daughter Sophia high above his head, while she squealed with laughter. The sound filled every corner of our home, chasing away the ghosts that used to live in the silence. I stood by the counter, sipping coffee, watching them like I still couldn't believe this was real. Margaret visited often now, claiming she was checking on the baby, though we all knew she just liked being around the noise. She'd bring oatmeal cookies, tell stories about growing up in the 1940s, and every so often she'd pause mid-sentence, smile at me and say, "You've brought the Blackwells back down to earth, dear." Took long enough. I'd laugh, though part of me knew she meant it. Victoria came by sometimes, too. Quiet, careful visits arranged under the court's supervision at first, then, by mutual understanding. Therapy had changed her, or maybe losing everything had. She was thinner, grayer, her posture smaller somehow. When she arrived, she didn't sweep in anymore. She knocked. That morning, she stood in the doorway holding a small paper bag of sugar cookies she'd baked herself. "May I come in?" she asked. I nodded. Of course. She stepped carefully into the living room, eyes landing on the crib near the window where Sophia slept. Her lips trembled slightly. "She looks like Ethan," she whispered. "She has your eyes," I said softly. Victoria blinked fast, not expecting kindness. For a long moment, she just stood there, hands clasped in front of her, staring at the tiny rise and fall of her granddaughter's chest. I poured another cup of coffee and handed it to her. "Here," I said. She took it, her fingers brushing mine for the briefest second. "Thank you," she said. We sat across from each other at the table, sunlight catching the steam between us. It wasn't warm, not yet, but it was civil. Peace doesn't always arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it just sits quietly sipping coffee in your kitchen. "Therapy's going well," she said after a while. "They say I'm learning to listen." I smiled faintly. "That's a good place to start." She looked down at the coffee, then up at me. "You didn't have to let me back into your life." "I didn't." I agreed, but I wanted Sophia to know where she comes from. The good and the bad. Victoria nodded slowly, as if each word cost her something. "I'm sorry, Isabella. Not the kind of sorry you write in a letter. The kind you feel when you finally see what you did. I didn't answer right away. I just really watched her. The woman who had once ruled rooms with diamonds and disdain was gone. In her place sat someone fragile human. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past," I said quietly. "It just proves you survived it." She looked at me with tears in her eyes, but didn't try to speak again. We sat there in silence, sipping coffee, the baby's soft breathing, the only sound in the room. When she left, she paused at the door, glanced back, and whispered, "Thank you." After she was gone, Ethan came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. He rested his chin on my shoulder, kissing the spot just below my ear. "You changed everything," he said softly. I smiled. "No." I told him. The truth did. Outside, the day stretched bright and clear over the San Diego hills. The world felt bigger than it used to, less divided by names, money, or the ghosts of old families. Sometimes I still thought about that day in the church. The sound of her hand meeting my cheek, the gasps, the silence that followed. It no longer hurt to remember. If anything, it reminded me of who I'd become because of it. They once called me the immigrant girl, the one who didn't belong, the one who wasn't good enough for their son. Now they call me family. And that's the thing about truth. It doesn't need permission to rise. It doesn't shout, it doesn't beg. It simply stands unshakable until the noise burns itself out. The truth was the loudest revenge and the sweetest. If you've ever been looked down on, remember this: justice doesn't need to shout. It only needs to be heard. And when it is, it echoes forever.